Picture a campfire in Africa 100,000 years ago. There are two men, one is tall, symmetrical, strong jaw, the kind of face modern culture puts on billboards. The other is shorter, scarred, asymmetrical, with a nose bent from an old injury. Conventionally, nobody's first choice. The women of the group are watching the second one. Not because ancient humans had bad taste, because they had better information than you do. Here is the thing that changes everything about how you understand attraction. Ancient women were not selecting for beauty, they were selecting for survival. And survival, in a world without medicine, without wealth, without any of the signals we use today, looked nothing like what modern culture has trained you to find attractive. It looked like scars, like endurance, like the specific, cooperative quietness of a man the group could not suppress. That is the man they chose, and the reason is stranger than anyone has told you. The conventional story is simple. Women chose the strongest, most dominant males. The biggest, the most aggressive, the alpha. That is how mate selection worked across the animal kingdom, and humans were no different. This story is wrong, not partially wrong, structurally wrong, in a way that the last 30 years of anthropological research has systematically dismantled. Here is what the evidence actually shows. The vast majority of human evolutionary history, roughly 95% of the time our species has existed, was spent in small, mobile hunter-gatherer bands of 30 to 50 people. And in those bands, something happened that has no real parallel in the rest of the primate world. Strong men were actively suppressed. This is not speculation. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying the structure of hunter-gatherer societies across the world, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Kung San of the Kalahari, the Aceh of Paraguay, the Badak of Malaysia. His conclusion, laid out in his landmark book Hierarchy in the Forest, is that Paleolithic human bands consistently, deliberately prevented any individual from accumulating power. If a man became aggressive or hoarded resources or tried to dominate the group responded, not by submitting, by coordinating against him. Mockery, ridicule, social exclusion, refusal to cooperate. In extreme cases, collective execution. This is what Boehm calls the reverse dominance hierarchy. Instead of the strongest bully rising to the top the way chimpanzee alpha males do, the human coalition actively leveled the playing field. Any man who behaved like a chimpanzee alpha in a Paleolithic band was not selected for, he was selected against. Which means the men who survived to reproduce in that environment were not the most aggressive, they were the most cooperative, the most useful, the most trusted. And the women who were selecting mates were selecting in that context, not for the billboard face, for the man the group kept. The competitor video got one thing right: ancient women were reading bodies, but it missed why the body they chose looked the way it did. Testosterone shapes male facial features during puberty, the brow ridge, the jaw, the cheekbones. High testosterone produces more pronounced, heavier features. The same hormones that build that face also suppress the immune system. This is called the immunocompetence handicap hypothesis. A man walking around with heavy masculine features is advertising that he had enough immune capacity to afford to burn some of it on his face. That is real. Women's preference for masculine faces is documented, particularly near ovulation, when the biological stakes are highest. But here is what the competitor missed. Masculine features and aggressive dominance are not the same thing, and in a reverse dominance hierarchy, the man with the heavy brow and the scarred face was often not the dominant male, he was the suppressed one. The one the coalition had kept in check. The Hadza women of Tanzania, one of the most studied remaining hunter-gatherer populations, rank men on hunting ability, not facial symmetry, specifically persistent hunting ability. The capacity to track an animal for 6 hours at a steady jog in heat over broken ground while maintaining the cognitive clarity to predict where it would turn. That fitness is not the fitness of billboard attractiveness, it is endurance, pain tolerance, intelligence applied to the environment over years. And crucially, it is the fitness of a man who cooperates. The best hunters in Hadza society share their meat, universally. A hunter who tried to hoard his catch was sanctioned immediately. The most respected hunters were the most generous. So the body ancient women were reading was not the body of the most aggressive man. It was the body of a man who had passed the environment's tests, cold, hunger, predation, disease, and whose response to passing those tests was to bring the food back and share it. The scars on his face were a resume. The fact that the group kept him was the reference letter. There is a second dimension to ancient female mate selection that almost nobody discusses, and it is probably more important than physical fitness. In a band of 30 to 50 people, you cannot fake who you are. Everyone watches everyone every day across years. You cannot perform competence for a first impression and then coast. There is no first impression. There is only the accumulated record of how you actually behave when things are hard. The men who rose in social standing in Paleolithic bands, the ones whose opinions were sought, whose presence stabilized the group, whose judgment was trusted in a crisis, were not primarily the physically largest. They were the most socially intelligent. Anthropologist Kim Sterelny's research on Paleolithic social structure suggests that the cognitive demands of group living, tracking alliances, managing conflicts, predicting other people's behavior, knowing when to cooperate and when to resist, were likely a primary driver of human intelligence itself. The social environment of a hunter-gatherer band was, in terms of informational complexity, one of the most demanding cognitive environments a brain can exist in. The man who could navigate that environment, who could read the group's dynamics, diffuse conflicts before they escalated, maintain trust across multiple competing relationships simultaneously, was providing something the group genuinely needed. And women were selecting for it. Behavioral economist Sarah Matthews' research with the Turkana of Kenya found that women's mate preferences were heavily weighted toward men with high social reputation, not physical dominance, not wealth, not physical attractiveness. Social reputation, how the group assessed you. This is a radically different selection environment than the aggressive alpha model suggests. The man women chose was not the man who dominated the group. He was the man the group respected. And in a reverse dominance hierarchy, those are almost opposite things. The dominant bully was suppressed or exiled. The man the group respected was kept fed, kept protected, kept included in cooperative activities that made survival possible. Choosing that man was not a soft preference. It was the highest information signal available. The group itself had already done the vetting. For 95% of human evolutionary history, this is how mate selection worked. Cooperative ability, social intelligence, demonstrated competence, visible, unfakeable, continuously updated in real time by a group that saw everything. Then agriculture happened. Roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, humans began domesticating plants and animals. Food could be stored, land became property, property became heritable. And for the first time in human history, a man could accumulate resources without demonstrating any of the fitness qualities that had previously made resources meaningful. The man who inherited land from his father did not need to be a skilled hunter, did not need to be socially trusted, did not need to have survived the tests the environment administered. He just needed to have been born to the right person. Male status decoupled from demonstrated ability for the first time in human history. And female mate selection had to respond, slowly, imperfectly, with the same evolved preferences running in a completely different signal environment. The instinct to read bodies for evidence of having survived difficulty is still present. It was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years and does not disappear in 10,000. But the things that signal this man has survived difficult things in a modern environment are not the same things that signaled it on the Paleolithic savanna. Wealth can now be inherited. Status can be performed. Physical fitness can be manufactured in a gym by someone who has never experienced genuine scarcity. The costly signals that could not be faked in a band of 40 people watching you every day can be almost completely faked in a world of strangers and curated photographs. The preference systems ancient women evolved are still running. They are just running on data they were not designed to evaluate, which explains a specific and strange modern phenomenon. The research on mate preference consistently finds that women report preferring cooperative, generous, socially intelligent men in long-term partner assessments, while simultaneously reporting that high testosterone, dominant-appearing men are more immediately attractive. This is not contradiction, this is two systems running simultaneously. The ancient assessment of social fitness and the ancient assessment of genetic fitness, both inherited, both real, both slightly mismatched to a world their female ancestors could never have imagined. The reverse dominance hierarchy model is well supported by cross-cultural anthropological data, but it is not without debate. Some researchers argue that Boehm overstates the egalitarianism of Paleolithic bands and that dominance hierarchies existed but were less extreme than in other primates. The immunocompetence handicap hypothesis has generated substantial research, but the direct link between testosterone levels, facial masculinity, and immune function is more complex than early studies suggested. Some subsequent research has found weaker effects. Female mate preferences also show significant individual and cultural variation that simple evolutionary models tend to underestimate. Context matters. Short-term versus long-term partner evaluation produces different preference profiles in ways that evolutionary frameworks are still working to explain. What the data consistently supports is this: prehistoric female mate selection was not primarily selecting for physical dominance, that cooperative ability and social reputation were significant factors, and that modern mate preference systems are operating in an environment substantially different from the one they evolved to navigate. The mismatch is real, the full picture is still being assembled. So why did ancient women choose the weakest man? They didn't, they chose the man the group had already chosen. The man whose presence made the band more stable, better fed, more likely to survive the next drought or predator or outbreak of disease. The man whose scars were proof and whose generosity was reputation. The man who could not be suppressed by the coalition, because the coalition itself depended on him. That preference is still in you, the instinct that assesses not how someone looks but how they behave when things are genuinely hard. The preference for the person who is calm under pressure, who shares without being asked, who the group trusts without being told to. You still run those calculations every time you find yourself more drawn to someone after watching them navigate difficulty than after seeing them perform confidence. That is not a cultural preference. That is 300,000 years of the most accurate mate assessment system ever evolved, still running exactly as designed. The world changed, the software didn't. I want to know one thing. Does this change how you think about attraction, or does it confirm something you already felt but couldn't explain? Drop it in the comments. This one is going to be interesting. If this changed something, like button, it takes a second and genuinely helps this reach people who'd find it useful. And if you want to keep following these origin stories, the real reasons behind the things you feel and do every day, subscribe. Next time, something that's been running in your brain every single night since you were born. See you soon.